Hello, I'm Peter Doherty of Princeton University Press, and we're here with William G. Bowen, President Emeritus of Princeton University and of the Andrew Mellon Foundation. We're going to be talking about his new book with Matthew Chingos and Michael McPherson, Crossing the Finish Line, Completing College at America's Public Universities. Bill, your book, Crossing the Finish Line, has an intriguing title in that it suggests that completion is the real issue in higher education these days. Would you care to comment on this theme by summarizing the argument of your book in a paragraph? What's it about?
Well, it's about crossing the finish line, and it's about the importance not only of starting out in college, which is, of course, number one, but finishing, graduating, because there is all sorts of evidence that the real payoff to higher education is not another year in school. It's completing a program of study and then going on and making something of what you've learned for the benefit of society. And we were persuaded that there was much too much emphasis on access, on starting, and not nearly enough on finishing. And so what we set out to do was to study completion rates at 21 flagship universities and at 4 state systems. And what we found was that the overall level of completion rates is not as high as one would want it to be, and that there were huge disparities in outcomes by race, by ethnicity, by socioeconomic status. The odds of finishing, in short, are very much a function of how you grew up, who your parents were, whether you came from a poor family or a wealthy family. And these disparities exist across all sectors of public higher education, relentlessly consistent.
Most of your writing has been on private universities.
That's right.
How did you get started on this project assessing the effectiveness of public higher education?
Bob Solow, Nobel Prize-winning economist at MIT, urged us to shift our attention from private higher education, which was the right place to focus when we were studying race-sensitive admissions, to public higher education when we were studying completion rates, because, of course, that's where 3/4 of the students are. And if you're really going to improve levels of educational attainment, as the Obama administration correctly wants us to do, you've got to focus on the public sector. That's where the action is.
Who are you trying to reach with this book?
We're trying to reach a wide variety of audiences. People in higher education who are concerned with contributing to increases in educational attainment. Policymakers in Washington, there are big issues here about student aid, among other things. Secondary school people. The transition from high school to college turns out to be a very important part of this story. So, in short, multiple audiences.
And what are the biggest challenges to improving graduation rates?
Well, the biggest single challenge is figuring out how to do better with candidates from modest circumstances. It's just not going to work to focus on the affluent, white, well-educated population. Their graduation rates right now are reasonably high, and there just aren't enough of them. So whatever you felt about that approach from the standpoint of morality, fairness, whatever, from a practical standpoint, if you're really going to improve educational attainment in America, you've got to do something about the attainment rates of these other groups.
Testing is at the centerpiece of so much of this. What have you and your team discovered about the predictive power of tests?
The book contains a long chapter on just this question, and the storyline is both straightforward and complicated. It's straightforward in that the high school grades students earn turn out to be a powerful predictor of completion rates, whatever the high school attended and whatever the college or university attended. Much more important than standardized tests.
And this is a new finding.
This is a new finding, and it's relentlessly consistent across, again, every group of universities that we study, every population group, whether it be minority students or white students from privileged backgrounds, absolutely consistent. Now, that's the simple storyline. We do not believe, however, that the right question is to test or not to test. We believe the right question is what tests have value in what settings. No one size fits all. And if you go back to the history of the College Board, what it was originally intending to do was to predict academic success, grades, at highly selective places like Harvard, which is of course where it starts. And to this day, tests are more valuable at the more selective institutions and more valuable in predicting grades. Where I think there is an issue is that at the mid-level public institutions that are more interested than Harvard is in graduation rates, because they need to be more interested than Harvard is in graduation rates, that the standardized tests are just much less useful than high school grades. Now, why is that? I think the answer is actually quite simple. What do high school grades measure? They measure not just cognitive competence, which they do, but also all of these other qualities, stick-to-itiveness, motivation, time management, do you show up the next day, do you do what you have to do? And it's those qualities that have more to do with finishing than whether you got another 20 or 30 points on some test. Now, there's one other part to this story that's very important, namely that achievement tests, and particularly scores on advanced placement tests, are incredibly powerful predictors, much better predictors than the so-called aptitude tests. And so what I'm hoping is that more and more use will be made of achievement tests, and especially scores on advanced placement tests, in deciding who should get the opportunity to study at this college or that.
While we're on high school, in your chapter on high school as a factor in higher educational outcomes, you describe a phenomenon called undermatching. What is undermatching, and how does it affect graduation rates?
Well, if there is a single prominent storyline in the book, it's this one. People at Chicago and the Chicago Consortium, Melissa Roderick and her colleagues, really deserve the credit for having pioneered the concept of match. And our findings are relentlessly consistent with hers. By match, we mean whether students end up attending the colleges or universities for which they're presumptively qualified on the basis of how they did in high school, their grades, their test scores, and all the rest. And the disturbing finding in our work with national data and with North Carolina data, and Melissa's findings in Chicago, is that the undermatch rate is very high. Now, by undermatch, we mean, of course, situations in which Sally, who has the grades and the credentials to go to wherever, some flagship university or some strong private place, doesn't do any of that. Goes to either a lower-ranked public university, to a two-year college, or no place. And so the loss to the system of these people is huge. I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, that in Chicago, of students attending academically demanding programs in the Chicago public schools who had excellent credentials, the undermatch rate was something like 50%. And particularly high among the Hispanic population, and again among students from modest backgrounds. And when you stop and think about it, no surprise. These students are lost mostly at the application stage. If they apply, they get in. If they get in, they go. But they don't apply. And why don't they apply? Well, they don't have the information. They don't have the motivation. They don't understand what the real cost is. They're fooled by the sticker prices. How can I ever afford that? When in fact, it's often the case that the real cost of going to a selective place is less than the real cost of going to a less selective place.